Welcome to the STARTS4Water vlog. My name is Anne Nichten. I'm your anchor woman. In this series, we'll have conversations with artists who are currently working as artists in residence at the STARTS Partner Institutes. I would like to welcome our guests today, the artist group Center for Genomic Gastronomy, Zach Denfield, Catherine Kramer, Emma Conley, who are doing their residency at V2 in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, and Koen Arts, author, researcher, and lecturer at the Forest and Nature Conservation Policy Group at Wageningen University, the Netherlands. Welcome to you all. And Zach, Catherine, and Emma, can you introduce yourself and tell us in short about the project that you are developing in your residency in Rotterdam?
Sure. We have some slides you can share real quick. Sorry, but we are the Center for Genomic Gastronomy, and it's mainly the three of us, although we expand to more people often as well. But we call ourselves an artist-led think tank that examines the biotechnologies and biodiversity of human food systems. So what we mean by that is that we have a mission as a think tank that we want to map food controversies, prototype alternative culinary futures, and imagine a more just, biodiverse, and beautiful food system. And the three of us have been working on this project now for over 10 years. Well, Emma joined, 8 years ago? So we've been working together for a long time and done several projects. We create publications as part of our practice. We create installations, often interactive with food, so people can taste things. And then we also create workshops and other kind of events. And recipes are very important as well. What are the different foods we're eating, and where did the ingredients come from, and what stories do we tell with what we eat? And here's an image with some of our collaborators that we've worked with over the years. They range from chefs to scientists to hackers to other artists, authors. It's
occasionally farmers. That's
occasionally farmers, yes.
The hardest one to crack.
Yeah, for sure.
And then for this project, we really started with the idea of food forests and how they relate to sort of water management and water futures. We went into the residency wanting to look closer at existing food forest projects that are already being implemented to manage water, to heal landscapes, and to prepare for growing and eating in climate-changed futures. So food forests are resilient in a lot of cases, both for drought and flood conditions, which will be useful when you learn more about the regions we're looking at in a bit. And they can also help us reduce chemical inputs into the food system, keeping groundwater clean, but also as we started thinking about different scales, avoiding some of the agricultural runoff that happens downstream and then impacts oceans. So we visited some existing projects and sites to experience firsthand what is possible and to remind ourselves what is at stake.
Yeah, so we visited three main sites, the Veluwe region in the Netherlands, the Kettelbrook Food Forest, which is nearby, but a little bit closer to the border with Germany, and then also a food forest, kind of wild garden, that's quite well known outside of Trondheim in Norway. And so in the Veluwe, we were confronted with scientific research, which was kind of unsure if the future of the region would be more about flooding or more about drought. We also visited the Hoog Veluwe National Park, which describes itself as a museum of landscapes. And so we were quite inspired by that as artists, because it's kind of this constructed wilderness. And we thought what would it be like to make an edible artwork, but at the scale of a landscape? And that maybe would take 10 or more years to create. And then at the Kettlebrook Food Forest, we saw evidence of resiliency in both drought and flooding from previous years. And we're inspired by the assembled diversity of edible plants that were either new to the Netherlands or maybe specifically bred for the temperate climate there. And then so outside of Trondheim in Norway, we were introduced to another inspiring example of what is possible with wild gardening or food forestry. We visited, or in this case, even on marginal land and in a pretty challenging climate and challenging growing conditions. And there we were really inspired by the kind of attention to taste and flavor that came from the plants in this food forest. And this kind of reignited our interest in creating inspiring and tasteable climate resilient futures for general audiences.
So where we're at with the residency, and of course we have to compress this all into a very short time, but roughly we're describing the work that we're up to the last stretch here as being about food forest fantasies. So kind of developing a suite of tools, recipes, and rituals for the system of farming that uses perennial plants and edible trees in order to manage water, to minimize chemical inputs, and to revive soils. So each experiment in the Food Forest Fantasies project examines tensions and possibilities of growing and eating from food forests. So some of the tensions that need to be understood and kind of stretched are aspects of time, place, technology, and taste. In terms of taste, what will a climate resilient food future taste like? And being very precise about the ingredients, and the kinds of flavors and ways of building food cultures around these new ways of farming and producing food. Time, because food forests, like a lot of other soil regeneration projects, take a lot of time. So how do you sustain attention and cultivate anticipation for a type of farming that needs to be planted today and possibly can only be fully tasted 10 years from now? Zoo inside of Zoom, very freaky. What's happening? Place, the Netherlands is very striking because it's a landscape that's so highly managed and can change so quickly, and has very recently. But on the other hand, is highly optimized for efficiency and straight lines, and in terms of agriculture, export, and industrial farming. So, will the resilient and slow forms of farming find a home in the Netherlands? Is a question that we have to sort of start to answer and work towards. And finally, technology, and these last images might help get a hint of where we're heading in terms of that direction. But one could think about food forests or agroforestry as a tool for food systems and climate change. So this is kind of a new way of thinking about technologies and green technologies. But throughout this process, we've been in conversation with people who work in emerging digital technology fields like blockchain and machine vision. And we've been looking for moments where those technologies cross over and make sense in terms of food forestry, and places where there's like inherent contradictions. So for example, we've been trying to get our head around like blockchain and NFT and sort of the absurdism about those, because those technologies happen so quickly in cycles of a few months or years, whereas agroforestry, you're looking at decades of prototyping and learning. So over the last few months, we've been prototyping a pop-up restaurant, what that might look like to eat from a food forest. We've conducted a marathon interview. We're looking very happy here. We were, though, a 3-hour interview with people from academia, farming and food, as well as blockchain worlds. And then we've started to prototype an artwork that'll hopefully allow us to serve food from existing food forests and work towards building our own edible landscape at scale as an artwork. And then the public can see a presentation of this work in September of this year at V2 in Rotterdam. I think that's it. Yeah, so that's what we've been up to in 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. That's been a very condensed and interesting presentation. Before I go into some questions, I would like to ask Koen to introduce himself and his work in a nutshell, and how your work, Koen, connects to the Drought in Waterland project.
Yeah, Koen Arts, many different kind of roles and interests. I work as a lecturer at Wageningen, as you mentioned already, on a at the Forest and Nature Conservation Policy Group, and I really focus there on interactions between humans and nature. There could be problematic interactions in terms of, for instance, conflicts, but also productive interactions. Yeah, so I really look at human dimensions of nature conservation more broadly. Sometimes looking a bit at technological aspects, but also at anthropological aspects and philosophical aspects, and also combining a whole kind of suite of methodologies, sometimes a bit more positivist, empirical, sometimes a bit more so kind of thick social science with narrative components, and so forth. And yeah, in a way, I've studied forest and nature conservation in Wageningen as well, and then made a bit of a detour with postdocs and various projects and so forth, and then came back. And what I like there about Wageningen specifically, as you may know, is that it's quite a specialized university, so it brings together all kinds of environmental sciences, but also including food technology sciences and so forth. Super specialized, but a lot of interdisciplinary work going on. So a very vibrant place in that sense. Yeah, meanwhile, doing this, I always had a very kind of strong interest in nature experience and direct personal nature experience. And that's probably one of the prime reasons of studying forest and nature conservation in the first place. But then, of course, as so many fellow academics do as well, you find yourself caught behind a laptop or a desk a lot of the time. And that wasn't so satisfying for me anymore. So I increasingly looked to do other things, and this started from a young age already, doing all kinds of nature skill activities, practical things in the woods, using the senses, using skills, traditional ecological knowledge. And this slowly developed also into a bit of an enterprise, a small business, and all kinds of other projects. And increasingly, these are interwoven now. So for instance, a year ago, I started with a new course, which is entitled Anthropology of Basic Nature Skill. And there we take 40 students into the woods, and through very practical things like fire making and shelter building, we dive into the kind of the conceptual and theoretical aspects of those topics, sometimes linking it to indigenous knowledges and so forth. But also, for instance, thinking about modern day sustainability issues and challenges, and yeah, also linking that to individual consumerism and so forth. Meanwhile, also, I try to engage with a broader non-academic audience as well. So I write about these things, and I try to do that in an accessible way, kind of reminding myself often that not everyone is in this green bubble, convinced of the idea that we need to go forward in a sustainable way on planet Earth, maybe not even convinced of some of the challenges that we're facing. So yeah, these two come together, these 3 points come together in various ways. And I think that's somehow how I ended up here, and really excited to be here. I was really interested also in your presentation and explanation. I've actually had a couple of students working on food forests, and what specifically interests me there as well is, well, there's so many so many interesting aspects and dimensions to it, but to pick up one for the moment, is for me also the question of, there's almost a technical question. First, how can we produce more in a more sustainable way and so forth. But for me, also the potential that I'm sure you can talk a lot about is also about, yeah, the kind of vehicle that it can be for nature connectedness, and thereby also a vehicle for, say, a more integrated, holistic, more developed land ethic, perhaps, where food production is only one element of a sustainable life on planet Earth. Maybe I'll leave it at this for the moment, Anna, and then I'm sure we dive into some of these topics later.
Lovely, thank you so much, Koen. Another aspect that I read about at the website of STARTS4Water, and I also recalled it from earlier conversations with the Center of Genomic Gastronomy, is that they are planning to also spend time and plan concepts for education. Is that still part of your plan, Zach, Catherine, and Emma, or is that an idea that's long past?
Okay. I mean, also you could call us CGG for short. It's easier to get out.
No, that's okay. It's okay.
I think everything we do is really extremely didactic. So rarely are we making artwork that's like not explained, often with the purpose of education. So I'm not sure specifically what random thing we may have thrown off in the past, but I would say, and Emma should definitely talk about this, that we have a big commitment to like communicating through our artwork and meeting people where they're at.
Okay. Because Koen introduced in his let's say, popular scientific work, the whole notion of rewilding education and rewilding teaching. And I was curious if how that connect, or if there's a connection with your idea on education in your residency project.
I guess ours is more like mock wilding education. I think.
Okay, that's fine.
I think in our final kind of artwork for this, or whatever we are going to present in September, there will be an element of storytelling that kind of functions as a transportation device to maybe a future or a different reality, but also that has some components of education woven in. So I think the arts are kind of always rewilding education in a bit. The opportunity is there's always an opportunity for that. But yeah, it'd be interesting. I think I understand what Koen means by rewilding education, but maybe we could hear more.
Yeah, that's a good question for Koen. Koen, what do you mean with rewilding education and rewilding teaching?
Yeah. I mean, starting maybe with the notion of rewilding. This is by origin an ecological word, right? And in a way, it fits in with a new discourse around how to approach the land such that more natural autonomy is possible. And this is something obviously that in the Netherlands we find extremely difficult, because the Netherlands is to a large degree it can exist by virtue of controlling the sea and the land. But we also understand now increasingly ecologists, conservationists, land managers, land planners, and so forth, that with these ecological crises, new approaches, bigger thinking, in a way more revolutionary approaches are needed than simply fighting fire on a particular small scale, and rewilding could maybe fulfill a role in there. But I think still, and this is a bit of the genesis of how we came to this notion of rewilding education, I think in a way, and I see it around me at university and other places, is we are very much focused on techno fixes, on making things more efficient, to make sure that management processes are running more smoothly, and we kind of assume that this would be an answer to all kinds of environmental challenges, and it's not. Because the kind of the root causes of the current environmental crisis that we're facing go beyond that. It's not a matter of making things more efficient or producing more food and or high protein food or whatever, and then distributing that fairly. There's all kinds of ethical dimensions to that, but it doesn't link up with our ethics or our broader understanding of how we stand in the world. I think how we stand in our own environment. So in a way, I think all education that we need for the coming decades is a transformational type of education, where really you can answer all kinds of technological questions and practical questions and inventing new things and so forth. But for me, the key challenge there is how does it link up with, you know, personal and communal and societal ethics, and I think that's where the arts for sure come into play, but also all kinds of pedagogies that I think need to be transformational. And rewilding for us was just maybe a concept that we could use to develop such transformational pedagogies, and not really claiming anything new, because under the name of, you know, transformational pedagogies, wild pedagogies, there is a lot of things out there already in all kinds of arts, and so in that sense, not claiming too much here, but that's how we looked at these things, and also realizing that, you know, we often talk about this nature as if it's somewhere else, away from us. In the Hoge Veluwe, the national park that you referred to in your presentation, this is also quite kind of implicitly reproduced. Nature is away from us, and we can go and visit it in a holiday or on a Sunday afternoon, but we kind of fail to interact with it on a daily basis. And so for me also, transformational approaches to the land are also, you know, they on the one hand something abstract, and on the other hand something very practical that you do with your hands, with tasting. And that's why I liked some of your artwork examples where you invite people to taste. It should be a sensory kind of experience. I think that's at the basis of transformational approaches, of transformational learning.
Nice. And actually, there's a word that we like to use, which sometimes gets left out in education, which is like pleasure or joy. And well, there's this sort of like pedagogical tasting, like taste this, it came from this landscape and this is why this is important. But then there's just the sort of joy that we all had when we visited one of the food forests, but that we also see in our small child when they taste something new they've never tasted, or that just does something unexplained. So I think that's part of the excitement of these spaces, is that you can taste both for learning or with some purpose, or you can taste also sometimes just for pleasure, and that can come from novelty, or it could come from a deep memory of something that's there. But to not lose like pleasure and joy in the process.
And I think at its core, our projects are often about moving away from efficiency. There's nothing efficient about any of our projects, I can tell you that. But I think it's really about, what are your kind of, how do you gauge success, or whatever, however you want to frame it. But, I think this drive for efficiency has really blinded us to many other elements that are really important to consider when, trying to imagine how we will feed ourselves in the future, for example. And a food forest is, definitely not the most efficient strategy, but it does tick many other boxes that efficiency kind of eliminates, like drought tolerance and water retention and all of these things. But and it's also just a more pleasant place to be or to experience. It's much nicer to go visit a food forest than it is to go and visit a monocropped, corn farm. So yeah.
So in that sense, Catherine, we might be good off asking Koen if this transformational education he has in mind also includes a shift towards, let's say, communal or societal value creation instead of economic value creation. That seems to be the key here. Koen, can you help us out there?
Yeah, I think, this individualistic, approach to consumption, to the world, is part of the problem here, and in a way we can see that kind of dissolving of communities in all kinds of contexts is hugely problematic. When you ask some indigenous community leaders about the future or the past, they think in 7 generations. We kind of forgotten about this. We think we're the only generation, and maybe if we have children or so, then or we have a grandparent still, then we see 2 or 3 generations. And I think that communities aspect is so easy to kind of undervalue, but it's crucial. I see it when being in the woods. I love to be alone in the woods, but the moment you're together, there is that extra spark, that extra motivation, that extra joy that it brings. In part here, where I think we are dealing also with the romantic tradition of white privileged male authors who write about singing skylarks and so forth, and that's 200 years later kind of still the kind of the image that we have of nature experience. So yeah, and then also the moment you have community buy-in and community engagement with such projects such as a food forest, then indeed the valuation becomes completely different. You're kind of breaking out of that chain of commodities and demand and supply, and it becomes potentially more you go towards a kind of an economy of gift, as Robin Wall Kimmerer calls this, or of exchange, and then for everyone in the community there's a role. People at the kind of the strength in their lives, they can do more plowing or whatever, or harvesting, and other people can provide more for whatever role they might want to take or might see for themselves. So this also comes with diversity that currently seems to be missing sometimes a bit in initiatives. So for sure, I think, Anna, there is again so much to explore here and to be encouraged.
Before we end this conversation, I would like to ask all of you to give a short takeaway for our audience, that is students, educator, and maybe especially for this edition, education designers and food lovers, chefs and the like. So, Koen, what's your takeaway?
Gosh, yeah. I should have seen this question coming, I guess, but there's a lot to digest. It hasn't quite sunk in yet. But I'd like to pick up on the point of sensory experiences connected with joy and passion and curiosity. I think for me, and just looking also at the work you're doing, for me, that's the best starting point, and that really helps to answer much bigger questions.
Lovely, thank you. And CGG, what's your takeaway?
1 or 3.
I can, maybe as you want to. Come on.
For me, I think the takeaway that I have to still sit with and think about is time, and how I think about time, and how everyone around me thinks about time, and basically taking time to try and slow down and to think things through. And yeah, especially in an art and design context, you know, the deadlines are always short and quick, and yeah, what would a practice that took time look like?
Mm-hmm.
I think I would, for me, it's about thinking a little bit about this. How do these technologies and the technologies of the future, how could they combine with technologies like food forestry? And I think this is a line from Zach, so I'll steal his. I hope he wasn't planning to say it. But asking questions like, will there be permaculture in the metaverse? And how not only could some of these future technologies help further an agenda that is about sustainability and responsible landscape management, et cetera, but also how do we make sure that the values that we've talked about today, or that Koen has emphasized, are those also taken forward in the development of new technologies that may happen whether we want them to or not. So it's a bit of putting these two together and seeing where the opportunities are, and then where there's some serious tensions or challenges ahead.
Thank you. And Zach, do you want to take the last takeaway?
No, that's a good place to end it. It's great.
Okay, then I would like to thank you all a lot. And thanks also to our audience for watching this vlog. And please stay tuned for next editions. And Koen, Zach, Catherine, and Emma, thanks so much. It was a pleasure talking to you. Goodbye.
Thank you. And thanks, Koen. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much.
It's nice to meet you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.